Owen Callahan was 22 years old when Victor Drummond's hired men gave him 24 hours to pay his gambling debt of $140 or leave Rawlins, Wyoming territory permanently. It was October 1873, and Owen had neither money nor prospects, just the consequences of 3 months of poker games where his luck ran consistently bad and his judgment worse. The debt started innocently enough in late June 1873. Owen worked as freight handler for Union Pacific Railroad, earning $35 monthly, decent wages for unmarried 22-year-old with no dependents. Lived in boarding house for $8 monthly including meals, spent perhaps $12 on necessities, saved remainder, would spend evenings at Drummond's establishment, combination saloon, gambling hall, and social club for railroad workers and miners. The place had respectable front room with bar and tables, back room with poker games, running continuously from 6 p.m. to midnight. Owen had learned poker growing up in Missouri, played for pennies with family and friends, understood odds reasonably well, knew when to fold, could read basic tells, started playing at Drummond's in June, betting small, 50-cent pots, dollar maximums, would win perhaps $3 one night, lose $2 next night, balance out over weeks. Sociable gambling that felt harmless. July 2nd, he won $28 in one exceptionally lucky night. Best hand after best hand. Opponents folding when he bet, paying when he had cards. Left table elated, bought drinks for everyone, felt like gambling genius. That $28 night changed everything, made him feel skilled rather than lucky, made him believe he could consistently win, made him start betting larger amounts, seeking larger returns. July 5th lost $18 in bad night, where every promising hand failed to connect. Felt annoyed but not concerned. He'd won 28 2 days earlier. Losing 18 just meant he was up 10 overall. July 8th won $12. July 10th lost 16. July 15th won 8. July 19th lost 23. July 22nd lost 17. By end of July, he'd tracked his results, down $42 from where he started month, despite the one big winning night. His saved money was depleting, but he couldn't shake feeling that one more big night would recover everything. That's when Drummond's credit system became relevant. Victor Drummond ran profitable business extending credit to employed men who lost more than cash they carried. Would write markers, IOUs for specific amounts plus 2% weekly interest, payable when convenient. "You're good for it," Drummond would say reassuringly. "Railroad men always pay. Take marker for 20, win it back next week, pay me 21. Simple." August 1st, Owen accepted first marker for $15 after losing his remaining cash. Felt liberating. Could keep playing despite being cleaned out. Won $6 that night, felt vindicated, paid back the $15 marker plus interest next payday. But August 5th accepted another marker for $23. August 8th, another marker for 18. August 11th, won back 12, took another marker for 25, continuing to play. The markers were accumulating faster than he could pay them back because he wasn't actually winning, was gradually losing, but credit system masked the harsh reality of continuous depletion. By August 20th, owed Drummond $64 on accumulated markers. His monthly wage was $35. After room and board and necessities, had perhaps $12 available for debt payment. At $12 monthly, would take 6 months to clear debt, assuming he stopped gambling completely. But he didn't stop. Believed desperately he could win back the debt faster than slowly paying it down. Would take new markers to fund continued play, hoping for another big winning night, like the $28 July 2nd triumph. August 25th owed $85. September 1st, Drummond called him to private office and showed him the accumulated markers, 8 different IOUs totaling $85 principal, plus accrued interest at 2% weekly that pushed total to $92. "Owen, you need to stop playing and start paying," Drummond said seriously. "This debt is getting beyond what railroad wages can cover. I don't want to have to collect aggressively." Owen promised to stop gambling and pay down debt. Made 2 weeks of small payments totaling $8. Then September 19th, lost discipline, played again, lost $17, took new markers. By October 1st owed $112, including accumulated interest. October 7th, Drummond summoned him again. The debt is $140 now with interest. I'm calling it. Pay in full by October 15th or depart Rawlins permanently. I can't carry this any longer. Owen had perhaps $12 in savings. His monthly wage was already committed to room and board. He couldn't borrow, no family in Wyoming, no friends with money. Drummond was sympathetic but firm. Business is business. Pay by October 15th, or my collectors will ensure you leave Rawlins permanently. October 14th at dawn, 2 of Drummond's hired men visited Owen's boarding house room. Large men who worked as bouncers and debt collectors, spoke politely, but carried message clearly. Mr. Drummond requires payment of $140 by tomorrow noon. If you cannot pay, you will depart Rawlins by tomorrow evening. If you refuse to depart voluntarily, we will ensure your departure is involuntary and unpleasant. Owen understood the threat. Drummond's men had broken bones of men who welched on gambling debts. He had no money, no way to get money, and no desire to be beaten. Would leave Rawlins as demanded. But leaving meant losing railroad employment, arriving in unfamiliar town with no job prospects and depleted savings. He needed alternative that used his $12 to establish something self-sufficient, rather than just delaying inevitable poverty in different location. The idea came from conversation he overheard at railroad yards between 2 construction foremen discussing rejected lumber. The railroad had pile of logs that failed quality inspection, twisted grain, major cracks, excessive knots, normally disposed as waste, currently sitting in lumberyard taking space. Foreman was offering entire pile for $5 just to clear the area. Owen went to lumberyard October 14th afternoon, found the rejected pile, approximately 40 logs ranging 8 to 14 feet long, 6 to 10 inches diameter. Every log had significant defects, spiral grain that made them weak structurally, longitudinal cracks from improper drying, knots that would cause splitting. No carpenter would use them for quality construction, but they were logs, actual timber that could be stacked and fitted. For someone with no money and no options, defective logs were still building material. "I'll buy the reject pile for $5, Owen told yard foreman. "Can I have until tomorrow to move them?" "Take them whenever," foreman said, happy to clear space. "They're worthless, but they're yours." Owen spent October 14th afternoon and evening moving logs from railroad yard to land. He'd scouted 8 miles from Rawlins. Public land, unclaimed, poor quality for farming but had small creek for water and scattered pine forest. Would build there where Drummond's men wouldn't bother finding him. Used borrowed wagon making 4 trips hauling logs. Total 40 logs transported by midnight. Returned wagon, gathered his minimal possessions, left Rawlins October 15th at dawn before Drummond's noon deadline. The construction site was isolated, 8 miles from town following rough mining road, then 2 miles cross-country to location Owen selected near Small Creek. No neighbors within 5 miles. Just creek providing water, scattered pine forest, and 40 defective logs that needed transformation into shelter before Wyoming winter arrived in 3 weeks. He started October 16th by unloading and sorting logs, examining each one's specific defects to determine best use. Every log had problems that would make skilled carpenter reject it, but problems varied in severity and type. Log 1. 12 feet long, 9 inches diameter, spiral grain, twisting full length. This type of grain made log structurally weak, would split along spiral under stress, but if positioned horizontally without major load, might work for upper wall courses. Log 2, 10 feet, 8 inches diameter, longitudinal crack running 8 feet of length. Crack made log essentially split in half, but if positioned crack down and not load-bearing, could work for wall section. Log 3, 8 feet, 7 inches diameter, huge knot cluster at center creating weak point. Knot area would break under stress. Could only use as short sections, avoiding knot area. He sorted logs into categories: least defective for bottom courses requiring straightness and strength, moderately defective for upper courses, severely defective for roof supports or firewood only. Foundation was 4 large flat stones, positioned at corners creating level base. Checked level using string and water-filled pot. Primitive but effective. The foundation needed to be solid because every log above would rest on it. Started stacking first course, 4 logs creating square 8 feet on each side. Selected straightest logs from his pile, but even straightest had spiral grain creating twist. Log 1 would twist left, log 2 would twist right, trying to fit them at corner created gap. Traditional notching technique required cutting saddle notch where logs crossed. Half-round depression allowing logs to interlock tightly. But twisted logs wouldn't interlock tightly regardless of notching quality. The grain spiral meant surfaces didn't mate flat. He adapted using deeper notches and accepting larger gaps. Would notch aggressively creating exaggerated saddles, position logs accepting they'd rest imperfectly, planned to fill gaps later with moss and mud chinking. Second course revealed problem with longitudinal cracks. Log positioned with crack facing down should be stable. Crack not visible, log resting on solid wood below, but weight from logs above would force crack open wider. By fourth course, some cracked logs had split completely into 2 half logs, barely holding together. He repositioned worse cracked logs to non-load-bearing positions and reinforced with wooden pegs driven through crack, attempting to hold pieces together. Crude fix, but only option with materials available. Third course introduced knot problem. Knots are where branches grew from trunk, creating hard, dense wood that doesn't compress like surrounding softer wood. When 2 logs with knots meet at corner, knots prevent tight fit, creating gaps. He tried positioning logs to avoid knot-to-knot contact, but defective pile had so many knots that avoiding all conflicts was impossible. Accepted that some corners would have knot-created gaps requiring heavy chinking. By 6th course, approximately 4 feet high, he'd used his straightest logs and faced using progressively worse material. The remaining logs had extreme spiral grain, multiple cracks, or knot clusters that made fitting increasingly difficult. The walls were rising but looked terrible, zigzagging from twisted logs, gaps visible between courses. Some logs actually curved rather than straight, creating bowed sections. Any inspector would condemn structure as unsafe. But Owen wasn't building to code, was building to survive winter using whatever worked. 7th and 8th courses required creativity beyond basic stacking. Some remaining logs were too twisted to span full 8-foot wall, would rest on one corner, but lift away from opposite corner due to spiral. He cut these logs shorter, used multiple shorter pieces to complete wall sections, created patchwork construction. By 9th course, approximately 6 feet high, he'd exhausted usable logs for walls. Needed 3 more courses to reach planned 7-foot wall height, but had only severely defective logs remaining. Made decision to stop walls at 6 feet rather than struggle with worst materials. Would build roof starting at 6-foot height, accepting reduced interior headroom. Better to have lower solid cabin than taller collapsing cabin. The roof framing required different approach than walls. Needed poles spanning 8 feet, acting as rafters supporting roof covering. His remaining defective logs were too heavy and crooked for rafters. Needed lighter straight poles from nearby forest. Cut 8 small diameter pine poles approximately 4 inches thick, 10 feet long. These weren't from his purchased logs, but from living forest. Ethically questionable taking timber from public land, but survival took priority over legalities. Positioned poles as rafters with 2-foot spacing creating roof frame. Covered rafters with pine boughs cut from lower branches of forest pines. Overlapped boughs, like rough shingles creating layer that would shed water initially. Final roof layer was sod, cut prairie grass with 3-inch root layer, creating pieces approximately 12 inches square, laid sod over pine boughs, overlapping like shingles. The grass would keep growing, roots would interweave, creating living roof that improved with time rather than degrading. The door was gap in south wall, approximately 3 feet wide, left during wall construction. Cut willow branches from creekside, wove them basket-style creating mat 3 feet by 6 feet. Hung mat over door opening using rope hinges, could push mat aside to enter, let fall back to close. Primitive but functional. Window was 12-inch square gap left in east wall during construction. No covering. Would stay open, allowing light entry and smoke escape, but also admitting weather. By November 1st, the structure was complete. Would call it cabin, though barely qualified. 6-foot crooked walls with massive gaps, living sod roof over pine boughs, woven willow door, open window hole. But it was enclosed space with fireplace providing some shelter from elements. He moved in November 2nd, with winter already threatening. Had gathered perhaps half-cord firewood. Not enough for 4-month winter, but all he'd managed while building. Had no food stores beyond 10 pounds of cornmeal purchased with last $2. Had 1 blanket, cooking pot, knife, and determination to survive winter that would test whether defective log cabin could keep man alive. The first serious cold came November 10th, temperature dropping to 10 degrees overnight. The cabin's inadequacies became immediately obvious. Wind blew through gaps between twisted logs despite chinking. The moss and mud filler didn't seal properly against wind pressure. Cold air poured through, creating drafts that made interior barely warmer than exterior. The sod roof leaked heat massively. Heat from his small fire would rise, pass through gaps in pine bough layer, escape into night. He'd burn firewood desperately trying to warm space that couldn't hold heat. The woven branch door provided minimal barrier. Wind would blow through the weave, creating constant cold draft across floor where he tried to sleep. Temperature inside with fire burning was perhaps 35 degrees, 10 degrees warmer than exterior, but still well below freezing. Without fire, interior matched exterior temperature within minutes. The cabin provided windbreak and precipitation shelter, but almost no thermal insulation. Owen developed survival routine based on harsh reality that his cabin couldn't keep him warm. It could only keep him dry and out of direct wind while he generated heat through constant fire tending and activity. Would wake at dawn frozen in his single blanket, build fire immediately using precious firewood, sit near flames until fingers and toes regained feeling. Eat small portion of cornmeal mush. Go outside to gather more firewood despite cold because fuel shortage was constant crisis. Would spend 6 to 8 hours daily gathering dead wood from forest, breaking branches, dragging logs. The physical activity generated body heat, keeping him functional. The gathered wood barely kept pace with consumption. Was burning perhaps 3 times his initial half-cord estimate. Needed 2 cords to survive winter, but had only gathered 1 cord by December. December brought sustained cold, weeks of 0 to -10 temperatures that strained every aspect of his marginal survival. The cornmeal ran out by Christmas. He had no money for more food. Started trapping rabbits and squirrels using snares made from scavenged wire. Success rate was poor, perhaps 1 animal per week providing minimal protein. He lost weight rapidly, started winter at 160 pounds, dropped to 135 by January from caloric deficit. Was burning perhaps 3,000 calories daily from cold exposure and constant wood gathering, but consuming maybe 1,200 calories from occasional game and wild plants. His hands developed severe frostbite from constant outdoor work without proper gloves. Fingers became numb, then painful, then blackened at tips. Would lose portions of 3 fingertips to frostbite damage, but didn't know that yet. Just knew they hurt constantly and worked poorly. The cabin required constant maintenance to remain barely functional. The sod roof would freeze solid during cold snaps, creating ice layer that actually improved insulation slightly. But during Chinook warm periods, sod would thaw and drip muddy water inside. He tried to patch leaks, but defective structure made permanent fixes impossible. The twisted log walls would shift and settle, creating new gaps. He'd repack with moss, but couldn't keep pace with degradation. By January, the cabin was noticeably more drafty than November. The most dangerous moment came January 15th, when extended extreme cold snap descended, bringing -20-degree temperatures that held steady for 5 days straight. Brutal, sustained freeze that depleted Owen's firewood faster than he could safely gather it, and forced terrible choice between freezing to death indoors or risking fatal frostbite gathering fuel outdoors. The cold front arrived January 14th evening with temperature dropping from 0 degrees to -10 within 2 hours. By midnight was -15. By dawn, January 15th was -20 degrees, with clear sky promising no moderation. Owen woke January 15th morning to interior temperature perhaps 0 degrees, despite fire burning overnight. The defective log walls couldn't hold heat against -20 exterior. Wind blew through massive gaps in twisted log construction, making heating impossible. His firewood supply, carefully gathered and rationed through early winter, was critically low, had perhaps 1.5 cord remaining in his stack near cabin. At current burn rate, desperately trying to maintain survivable interior temperature would exhaust supply in approximately 3 days. Normally would gather replacement firewood daily, spending 6 to 8 hours finding dead wood, breaking branches, dragging logs. But -20 temperature made outdoor work extremely dangerous. Exposed skin would develop frostbite in minutes. Prolonged exposure would cause core temperature drop, leading to hypothermia and death. January 15th, he stayed inside conserving fuel, hoping temperature would moderate. Burned minimal fire, maintaining interior around 15 degrees, cold enough that water froze in pot, cold enough he couldn't sleep, but above 0. Total consumption 1/8 cord, leaving 1 3/8 cords remaining. January 16th, temperature stayed -20, no moderation coming. Burned another 1/8 cord, maintaining 15-degree interior, bringing supply to 1 1/4 cords remaining, roughly 2.5 days of fuel at current rate. January 17th morning, he faced critical decision. Temperature still -20. Firewood down to 1 cord, perhaps 2 days remaining if he maintained current minimal heating. But with no new fuel incoming, 2 days of remaining warmth meant death on 3rd day when fuel was exhausted and interior dropped to -20 matching exterior. His options. Option 1. Stay inside, conserve remaining fuel carefully, hope temperature moderated before fuel exhausted. High risk, if temperature didn't moderate, would freeze to death when fuel ran out. Option 2, go outside in -20 cold for multiple hours gathering firewood. High risk, would develop severe frostbite from prolonged exposure, might develop hypothermia before finishing gathering, might freeze to death outdoors. Option 3, abandon cabin, walk 8 miles to Rawlins seeking shelter. Extremely high risk, 8-mile walk in -20 would almost certainly cause fatal hypothermia or severe frostbite before reaching town. He chose option 2 as having best survival probability, despite guaranteed severe frostbite. Would suffer permanent damage but might survive. Options 1 and 3 led to probable death. January 17th at 9 a.m., he prepared for outdoor work. Put on every piece of clothing he owned. 2 wool shirts layered, canvas coat, wool pants, second pair of thin pants over first pair, creating double layer. Wrapped hands in cloth strips, creating crude mittens. Wrapped face in scarf, leaving only eyes exposed. New preparation was inadequate, but was best he had. Stepped outside into -20 air that hit like physical blow. The cold was so intense it hurt to breathe. Air felt like ice stabbing into lungs. Eyes watered instantly, tears freezing on cheeks. Within 30 seconds, exposed skin on his face, where scarf didn't fully cover, felt burning pain signaling frostbite beginning. Forced himself to move purposefully rather than rushing. Rushing would cause sweating that would freeze, creating deadly wet clothing. Moved deliberately, walking quarter-mile to forest area with known dead timber. By time he reached forest, perhaps 15-minute walk, his face was numb. The burning pain had stopped, replaced by complete loss of sensation. Bad sign indicating frostbite progressing beyond superficial into deep tissue damage. His hands in cloth-wrapped mittens were losing function. Fingers felt wooden, difficult to bend. The cloth wrapping wasn't adequate insulation against -20, but he couldn't stop. Had to gather fuel. Survival required completing task despite damage accumulating. Started breaking dead branches from standing dead tree. The cold made wood brittle. Branches snapped easily under impact, but handling branches with half-frozen hands was difficult. Would grab branch, pull hard, feel it snap, struggle to maintain grip with numb fingers. Worked methodically for 2 hours breaking and stacking branches. Pile grew to manageable load. Perhaps 1/8 cord, 50 pounds of wood. Not enough for multiple days, but enough for crucial next 24 hours. By 2-hour mark, his hands were nearly useless. Couldn't feel fingers at all. Face was completely numb. Core body temperature was dropping, felt shivering, becoming less vigorous, signaling early hypothermia. Knew he had to return to cabin immediately or risk dying in forest. Gathered stacked wood using numb hands that could barely grip, made crude bundle using rope, began dragging bundle toward cabin quarter-mile away. The return journey was harder than outward, was colder from 2 hours exposure, was tired from work, was dragging heavy load. Made progress slowly, stopped frequently to rest, forced himself to continue when rest threatened to become permanent stop. Reached cabin after 45 minutes. Total outdoor exposure, approximately 3 hours, 15 minutes in -20 temperature. Staggered inside, dropped wood bundle, collapsed near fireplace, built fire with wood gathered at enormous cost. Flames created heat he could barely feel through hypothermia numbness. Sat close to fire, slowly rewarming. The damage became apparent, a sensation returned over following hours. His face, where scarf hadn't covered, cheeks, nose, forehead, had severe frostbite. Skin was white and hard, didn't respond to touch. Would eventually thaw, becoming painful, blistering, possibly gangrenous. His hands, where cloth wrapping had been inadequate, had deep frostbite on fingers. 3 fingertips, index finger left hand, middle and ring finger right hand, were white to first knuckle, completely numb even hours after rewarming. Severe damage that would result in tissue death and partial amputation. His ears, where hat hadn't fully covered, had frostbite damage, causing eventual scarring. But he was alive and had firewood for next day. Had survived the choice between freezing indoors and dying outdoors by accepting third option, gather fuel while accepting permanent injury as cost of short-term survival. February brought slight warming and psychological relief that winter was past halfway point, but also brought new crisis. His remaining food supply of trapped game and scavenged materials was depleted. He was essentially starving, losing weight from 135 to 120 pounds. Started eating pine bark, in a cambium layer that provided minimal nutrition but filled stomach. Tasted terrible, provided little caloric value, but prevented complete starvation. Combined with occasional trapped rabbit, bark diet kept him alive, but barely. By March 1st, he was skeletal, suffering severe malnutrition, had permanent frostbite damage to fingers, cheeks and ears, but was still alive and winter was ending. March 15th, temperature rose above freezing for first time in 4 months. Snow began melting. Spring was arriving, and Owen had survived winter in cabin that everyone would have said was impossible to survive in. He emerged from winter fundamentally changed. Had lost 35 pounds from 160 to 125, had permanent frostbite damage leaving him partially disabled. had proven he could survive conditions that would kill most men, but at cost that might not have been worth paying. April brought first visitor. Railroad surveyor passing through area discovered Owen's cabin and its emaciated occupant. Was shocked finding someone alive in such marginal shelter. Reported to Rawlins that the gambling debtor who disappeared in October had apparently survived winter 8 miles from town in makeshift cabin. Word spread quickly. People were fascinated and disturbed by Owen's survival. Fascinated that it was possible, disturbed by the physical cost visible in his damaged body. Victor Drummond himself visited April 20th, partly curious, partly concerned about man who'd evaded debt by nearly dying in wilderness, found Owen still living in defective log cabin, 20 pounds underweight, missing fingertips, face scarred from frostbite. "You survived winter in this?" Drummond said, examining crude structure. "This isn't proper cabin. It's pile of reject logs barely fitted. You should have frozen to death." "Almost did," Owen said quietly. "Several times, but freezing to death wasn't an acceptable option." Drummond was impressed despite himself, made offer. "The debt is forgiven. Come back to Rawlins. Work for railroad again. You've proven determination I respect." But Owen declined. The winter had changed him, had discovered he could survive on his own terms despite impossible circumstances. Didn't want to return to wage work and gambling temptations that created original crisis. He stayed on the land, improved the cabin over spring and summer using proper materials purchased from modest trapping income. Filed homestead claim on the acreage, proved it up over 5 years, owned land free and clear by 1878. Lived there 12 years until 1885, when he sold improved property for $280 and moved to Montana, seeking better farming land. The defective log cabin he'd built for $5 had been replaced by proper structure, but remained standing as testament to desperate survival. Owen lived until 1931, dying at age 80. His obituary mentioned his Montana farming and family, but focused on the $5 cabin, the reject log structure he'd built in desperation and somehow survived winter in despite permanent physical damage. The story is about a young man who made terrible decisions gambling away money he didn't have, then made desperate decisions building shelter from defective materials that barely worked. Who survived not through brilliant engineering, but through willingness to endure suffering most people wouldn't tolerate. Because sometimes survival isn't about being smart or skilled. It's about refusing to die, even when dying would be easier than continuing.